Welcome aboard the USS Aeronome. To become a member of our crew, please visit perfectorganism.com/support. As a patron of Perfect Organism, you'll receive exclusive perks and early access to content. Incoming audio transmission received. Please proceed to Subdeck 3 to begin playback. Thank you, and welcome aboard.
All right, sweethearts, what are you waiting for? Breakfast in bed? Another glorious day in the Corps. Day in the Marine Corps is like a day on the farm. Every meal's a banquet. Every paycheck a fortune. Every formation a parade. I love the Corps. Where's Basket?
Let's rock!
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I am your host, James Prater, and I am joined by co-hosts, and we will go around, starting with Patrick.
What up? It's Patrick.
And me, Conar.
Yeah, Sean here too.
What happened to Clara? And Clara.
There's a bit of a time delay.
I'm Clara.
Sorry, I'm all the way in Australia, even though I am in the future. I'm still delayed.
We should point out. So we're connecting from New Zealand, Australia, Scotland, Los Angeles, the Pacific Northwest, Boston. That's pretty geographically dispersed, I have to say.
Yes, it is.
But so there's Clara, and then also Mike. Did you say hi?
Hi, Mike here.
So tonight we are here to discuss essentially the relevance of aliens in kind of our modern culture, and I would say like the legacy of the film and how it's kind of affected us, but really how it's affected everything. This is another entry into our 40 Miles of Bad Road series. It's been really exciting. This is our first formal roundtable with kind of all of the gang. So thank you everyone for coming and for being here tonight, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Any questions? What is it, Private?
How do I get out of this chicken shit outfit?
I think we can just kind of start off this episode really just kind of talking about like what I'm interested in, kind of what aliens means to us, to kind of get us into it. Like, how does this film really sits in a place in fandom that's very special and very different from every other film. And I'm curious what that's like, where that is for everyone. And I want to start with you, Mike.
All right, yeah. Well, I think if I had to put aliens anywhere, it would be... Out of the original four, I'd put it as my third favorite. I didn't really have a strong connection with it growing up. When I was a kid, I've seen Alien dozens of times when I was a kid. I saw it first when I was very, very young, and that always stuck with me. And Aliens I saw much, much later. So Aliens really developed. I developed interest in Aliens because I liked the action aspect. First of all, that was the very first thing I thought of, because I was still very young. So just the idea that there were Marines and there were guns and explosions and violence, it got me really interested. Further along, though, I think I've come to appreciate the nuance in it more than I ever have, especially because of what we've been talking about. And it never hit that for me when I was a kid. I just thought things were really cool, and every big idea or theme kind of passed over my head. And yeah, I mean, I really don't. I'm probably the one here that has the least deep connection to it from a childhood standpoint. So yeah, that's really my story.
Clara here. It's really hard to say, because for me, I kind of watched Alien and Aliens so close together, because my cousin was watching Alien to prepare to watch Aliens, and then I think we went to the cinema and I watched Aliens, and it was just the two first movies are very much connected for me, and it left such an impression on me seeing the alien queen. It was just so larger than life. Like when you're a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, when I was watching this, it was just ginormous to see. It's kind of like seeing a dinosaur when you watch Jurassic Park. It was just so amazing to see something like that. And there's this sort of real sort of fear, because like you see all of these army marine types as strong, and you see them being overwhelmed by the xenomorph, because you've only seen one in the first movie, and then the second movie introduces a whole new level of combat with them. So it's like numbers versus numbers, and then you've got Ripley as well, and she's kind of coming out of her PTSD. That there's that initial like she stops just before she goes into the compound, because she knows what she's going up against and she's resistant, and then she kind of pulls herself out of that trauma to help Newt, and they're both kind of suffering it together, but they know that they have to try to get through the night to survive. And there's just so much I love about this movie. There's the design of the Queen, which is my second favorite in the series. My first favorite would have to be the Runner. And then there's the very iconic fight with the power loader as well. That was really cool, because like I love anything sort of tech and like extensions of the human body, and that would be with that sort of technology fighting the Queen. I also really absolutely love Bishop. No surprises there. And I think Lance Henriksen does a really great job of playing that sort of ambiguous android role, because you don't quite know whether he's good or bad because of our encounter with Ash initially in the first movie. So there's so much to be enjoyed in this. And although I don't really watch it for the Marines, because maybe, I don't know, maybe it's more of a guy thing, that the people seem to be more connected to the Marines. But for me, it's always been about Ripley, Newt, and Bishop, and maybe Hicks. But that's it, and the Queen.
Well, and Clara, yeah. I introduced some people to Aliens recently, and every person who's seen it so far says Bishop is probably their favorite thing about the movie. And yes. My girlfriend especially, yeah, I knew you'd like that. And especially, like, my girlfriend loves the AI aspect and the androids. And the people I show it to now, like in 2018, they really put Aliens farther down than maybe we all of us would have back when we saw it, which is, I don't know, it's an interesting phenomenon worth looking into.
I agree, that is an interesting phenomenon. Before we go around, can I take a pause for a second? I have personally had a very hard time capturing Lance Henriksen's voice. Like when I'm like reading like the comics to the kids or something, and I'm like trying to like do a Bishop impression. I have like a really hard time doing it. So I was wondering, can we hear some Lance Henriksen impressions? Does anybody want to give it a shot? It's so hard.
I wouldn't even do that. My accent.
How about? So I'll go first. Ready? I can repair the dish.
What? That sounds like Lance Henriksen as Mafia.
I can repair the dish.
What was that meant
Maybe
to be?
artificial. Well, I ain't stupid.
I'm going meatball. I'm gonna repair the dish.
Not bad for a human.
No, that's good.
That was better. That was good. All right.
Well, you didn't say
voices.
Did I give it a go?
You didn't set a very high bar there.
to be fair, I am doing an impression of just The Godfather, so you know. I can go next. I can dive bomb.
Someone. You gotta be a stranger.
You gotta be a stranger.
That was pretty good.
There's an ongoing joke in Shoulder of Orion that I can't do a Harrison Ford impression without basically making it sound like Christian Bale as Batman. So that's the problem.
Yeah.
The Bane voice.
It sounds more like Bane than Batman.
It's sort of the moral of the story is I can't do
like
fucking
Batman.
impressions of anybody. I'll go quick. You know, I've talked quite a lot about Aliens on this, so I won't take very much time. But my personal relationship with it is really firmly rooted in my childhood, and I have a very hard time separating myself from that interpretation of it. And part of why I personally have been so excited about this series is that it's the first time that I'm really going back and systematically unpacking it as a movie and not just as this shared cultural experience that I kind of feel like has always been there. Because Alien, I saw Alien first as a kid, but I fell in love with Aliens first as a child. That was the one, I loved Alien, and I was obviously fixated on it, but Aliens was the one that I kept watching and I kept going back to, and obviously the Kenner toys were and have been an enormous part of my life, and that whole Operation Aliens angle was really big. And I feel like as a kid, there was something really appealing to me about the fundamental optimism of Aliens and the worldview that portrays, that the world is a place where there are huge problems that if you're brave enough and if you have enough compassion and enough insight and you believe in yourself and in each other, you can get through the storm and you can triumph, all of the other Alien films to varying degrees are based in some way, in my opinion, on an existential nihilism, on almost like there's that the universe is cruel and the universe doesn't give a shit about you, and it's what you do in that situation that determines your character, and that's why Ripley is so indelible, I think. But in Aliens, there's this interesting subversion of that where it's almost like through superior firepower you can overcome anything, And I think it comes out of the milieu in which it was created, which we've talked a lot about in this podcast, which I won't get into again. But it's no coincidence that this was made in the early to mid 1980s, and I think part of why perhaps it doesn't feel as I don't want to say relevant because it is still relevant, but maybe part of why it's not quite as lionized in fandom as it once was is because that worldview is a little bit more problematic sometimes now. It's a little bit more complicated, and I think it's something that isn't just the easy sort of like, oh, we're going to go in there with superior firepower and we're going to win. Of course, what James Cameron was doing with the movie wasn't saying that you win through superior firepower. The whole point of it was to say that, in Vietnam, we lost not because we weren't funded better and we didn't have better weapons, but because we weren't prepared for what we were really up against, So the movie itself isn't actually selling that, but I think a lot of people see it through that lens, And I think it's interesting, Mike, you're absolutely right, and I do hope we get to come back to that point in this episode about how it's changed over time, vis-a-vis cultural appreciation. But personally, I definitely fell away from Aliens somewhat in my early adulthood. I kind of felt like it was corny and it was dated, and I really fell much harder in love with Alien 3, which I did not love as a child. I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it. And then Aliens kind of subsided, and Alien 3 to me it kind of took that place. And it still in some ways does have that spot, because for me it goes Alien 3, Aliens. But now in my fatherhood, I am rediscovering Aliens as an adult and finally getting to distance myself from my childhood experience of watching it somewhat, because I'm able to observe children watching it. We were just watching it again tonight with the kids, and seeing the wonder in their faces and seeing how excited they are and seeing how enthralled they are and how many questions they have about the technology and about what happened on LV-426 and about all these different things. You realize this is something that is truly evergreen, and there's enough going on in it that it's always relevant, but it's what you choose to focus on that determines, I think, its place in your life at any given time. And again, I'm just glad that we have this opportunity to unpack it, because I feel like I could use more Aliens in my life again.
Have your kids watched it multiple times, Patrick?
Oh, yeah.
Do they really like it then, huh?
Yeah, Jude actually tonight told me specifically, he's like, I want to officially tell you, because he knew that we were going to record this tonight, that Aliens is my favorite. Because for years it was Pacific Rim, nothing could unseat Pacific Rim, and he was like, you know what, Daddy? Aliens is my favorite movie. And I was like, yeah! I was like, that's the right answer.
That's good parenting right there.
Yeah, but I gotta say that's an absolute parenting win.
Do you cut the movie at all, or do you play it the whole way through?
So I there's a couple of things that I use bookmarks to skip over unless they want to watch it. One of them is just when they find the woman in the wall and she wakes up, because I think that's a little bit scary for them. But other than that, we pretty much watch the whole thing. We don't necessarily do it all in one night, because we usually do the special edition of it, and it's it's pretty long. So we'll do it one half one night, another half the next night. They have their own copies of the DVD for all the films. So they have their own TV that we keep in the attic in the game room. So when we do movie nights with the kids,
they're watching The Exorcist.
Yes.
Yes.
So like, you know, they feel really proud of it. They fucking love Aliens. They really do. And I don't blame them. And, you know, when we go downstairs and play, like when we play with our, you know, imaginations, it's usually either Ghostbusters or Colonial Marines, you know? And there's a reason for that, you know? There's a reason why that captures the imagination so much of children and of adults. Because I play it too, you know?
And on that kind of brings a good point as to how I got into Aliens. I watched it, I think, for the first time when about 5 or 6, and what really drew me in was, on one side you got these fascinating beasts who are so terrifying, but there's just something about them which absolutely fascinated me. And then on the other side, unlike Alien, where they're kind of normal people, you know, obviously you got the Marines, and as a young boy, that's what you play as, isn't it? You know, I mean, that's your dream, and that's, I think, initially what really drew me into Alien specifically out of anything in the series. And it's always been, for me, this is going to sound like such a sellout answer, but I've never been able to kind of place one above the other between Alien and Aliens. The order which I like the other ones always seem to chop and change, but I can never separate the first two.
I think I have to put mine on as it'll be number 1 for me. Definitely has to be.
Wait, Covenant, right? You're saying, Connor?
Oh no,
Covenant. Covenant's number 1. Okay, good.
We're not turning.
I just want to make sure I didn't mishear you. I just, you know.
No, but it's funny when you're talking about Aliens as well, because the movie's so expansive that sometimes you're sitting there and you're like, shit, what do we talk about? There's so many layers to the movie, it's unreal. But I'm like Sean, where I viewed it at a very young age, and you sort of go from like Disney movies to Aliens, and you're just like, wow. You're sort of like drooling for 2.5 hours all the way through. And it's like, yep, Dad, can I just steal this VHS? I'm going to watch upstairs like 3 times in a row. But it's just, I'm trying to think of another point to describe it. It's the fact that, as Sean said, you've got the aliens, which you can just stare at them for hours, even though the funny thing is, apart from the Queen, every shot of the aliens in Aliens is like super cut. You only see them for like a split second and that's it. But the Queen is the point where you really start like getting amazed, because she's got more screen time than any alien in any of the movies, I think.
She has more screen time than like Apone.
Yeah,
She's
exactly.
on screen so much.
It was like when
you secure that shit right now, Patrick.
Yeah.
You secure that shit.
You'll get lip cancer smoking those.
I can't repair the dish.
Look into my eye.
Bishop! God damn you!
Well, that's the beautiful thing about Aliens, right? Is that it's expanded the universe so much that most of these comics that we get and extras are based on Aliens, and all those goofy toys with Bishop having like mecha machine guns and ridiculous shit like that. You know, it's all from Aliens, and Aliens, I think we shouldn't crap on it, or the people who are having this kind of resurgence of like, oh, Alien 3 is the best one, and Aliens is Like, we do owe Aliens quite a bit from a fandom perspective. It's created a lot.
Yeah, it blew it right up.
Like everyone else, or most people, except for Mike, Aliens was my first experience, my first viewing experience of any film in the series. It was before Alien 3 came out. Everybody knows the story. We've been over it before. And then when Alien 3 did release, I kind of I gravitated to it way more than Aliens. And I really kind of shortchanged Aliens for a long, long, long time. In fact, I've come around to this newfound appreciation, but not just appreciation, but really understanding what Cameron was doing with Ripley and with the series. I think the series became what we know of it because of Aliens. Without Aliens, Alien 3 would not be as impactful. Ripley's story would not be wouldn't matter to us as much without Aliens. And it really, and I think it's really, this will kind of move into our other topic, aside from what what you have to say, Patrick, but like, or the larger topic in terms of like how Alien sets the standard for science fiction. I mean, really, it's the litmus test. I mean, whether it's Independence Day, the first one, Starship Troopers, so many films are kind of out to Alien Resurrection, replicate that that, I don't know, beautiful camaraderie and wonder of aliens, and most films have failed when they've tried, and that it kind of only leaves aliens. And I think that it just can't be said enough how important and powerful the film is. Now, it's still not my favorite. It's probably my third favorite. I'm getting flipped off by Dan right now after saying that. But I think that culturally it is a phenomenon, and I also think that it's not just a phenomenon because of the presence of the Marines or the setting, but also Ripley became who we know as Ripley in Aliens, and she became that Ripley before we knew Sarah Connor as Sarah Connor. There was Ripley, and there have been, Sarah Connor obviously is a different character. She's from Terminator, but there is a parallel that there's a parallel there. But Sarah Connor is no Ripley, that's for sure, and I think we all know it. But really, it's set up this framework for really what an amazing sequel can be, and how you do a sequel right. And I don't think it's seen its equal, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and how you have such like tremendous bravery and audacity in making a sequel, like just totally shooting for the moon and somehow going past it. My brief point before we just move on quick was that I defy any of those people who say that Aliens is not a good or a relevant movie to watch it for 2 minutes and find that they can easily turn it off. I feel like Aliens is something where when you don't engage with it regularly, it's easy to start relegating it to this sort of like, it's a sort of 80s action film. Like it's had its day, it's blah, blah, blah. And then you watch it and, within 12 frames, you're just totally glued because it's a piece of magic filmmaking, I think. But that's all I was going to say. I totally agree with you, Jamie. The impact that it's had on filmmaking and on science fiction is incalculably large.
I think partly what makes Aliens so special is it's just there's so many layers to unpack with it. You've got the characters, you've got the Marines, you've got obviously the aliens, you've got the music. Personally, for me, it's got the favorite music of all the Alien movies. I know people rate
really?
Alien 3 highly. Yeah.
Wrong.
God damn you!
There's your hot take right there. There's your hot take.
That's a little controversy.
There's it brings new things. It brings you the Queen. It brings you things like the power loader, the APC, an android, which is good, but you're not too sure, as Clara mentioned earlier. Like there's just pretty much everything put into the movie adds stuff to it, and you can't really say that about too many movies out there. So it's I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it's a very layered movie. Like there's lots of components. I can't think of one particular thing you can say that's why this movie is successful. That is why this movie is so long-standing, and that's why we have this fan following of this film, because there's not just one aspect to it. There's multiple things which make this movie.
Yeah, it's
so
everything. Everything firing on all cylinders is why it's so good. It's lightning in a bottle, and it's never been able to be captured. And I think, even though this is a discussion about aliens, why David Fincher was so, and that story, and why that film was so, in my opinion, successful, because he's like, I'm not trying to do that again. And that's what I think James Cameron was like. He was like, I'm not going to try and do Alien. I got to do my own thing. And he did his own thing, even though in some ways there's some repetition and some mirroring of elements that we've seen in Alien. Aliens was lightning in a bottle, and everything was working, whether it was Ripley and all the supporting cast and the setting and the creature and the Queen. It's this cocktail of something that it turned out right. But I also think James Cameron is really underrated. But again, I think it set up this litmus test for other films, and I think it's Aliens is part of the reason why so many other films in the franchise have struggled. It's a hard bar to pass,
And I don't mean to put a nuclear bomb on this episode right now so we can move on from this conversation. But that, to me, is the essence of why the Blomkamp Alien 5 idea is so bad. Because I think that to recapture the magic of Aliens without it coming across like some sort of parody or some sort of an anachronism, to be able to recapture the actual magic that Aliens had and also justify bringing these characters back and also justify retconning Alien 3, to me is a triple threat that almost could never be overcome. And I think we've seen...
Whatever.
I'm backing him up on this. I agree. 100%.
I don't think that it's possible. I don't think that he could do that.
I don't think you can't set out to, we're going to do better than Aliens or as good as Aliens. I don't even think that's what Blomkamp was doing. I know we're not talking about this, but you can't bring this up and not get some pushback for it. But I think that he was passionate about an idea and he wanted to make it, and that's a great setup.
Yeah,
as
but
far
that
as I'm
idea
concerned.
was a bad one.
The jury's out. You can't.
That jury is not out.
Ridley Scott is as passionate as any director, and he wanted to explore this jockey thing back even after Alien. And I mean, it hasn't turned out well for a lot of people, So you can have the best intentions. And I think Blomkamp does really, really appreciate Aliens. I don't think he would do... I think it would be a visually amazing movie. It would have some great performances, but from a story standpoint and chronological standpoint, everything... the base of Alien is right now that we know of would just be thrown out the window, and I can just only imagine the conversations we'd have. For better or for worse.
Insane. It would probably be a great
Ridley
podcast,
Scott from the 1980s would have made a much better version of Prometheus. The version that he made was just awful.
All right. I'm gonna recant my statement. This is gonna go down.
I just want to say though, with Blomkamp's Alien 5, I do think that it would be interesting for him to revisit the world, and if he didn't include Ripley, Hicks, and Newt, and just had his own storyline, then I would accept it. But I have to agree with Mike that if you retread old ground, or you put yourself at risk to make a pale shadow of what it really could have been, and that's what it would be. Dragging Sigourney Weaver back into the series, and everyone keeps saying, that's a really great idea, but then those same people do not like Alien 3 or Alien Resurrection, and I'm like, have you got a short memory? Come on, like, if you don't even want to recognize the two films where she had a lot of artistic control, then, what makes you think that Blomkamp would be able to deliver a film that you're going to like, that she's going to have probably just as much as control as she had previously? And maybe that's why Fox decided to shelve the project for the meantime. Who knows? So I can understand people loving these characters, and I can understand people hating Alien 3 because those characters died. But we're talking about the Alien universe here. There's no happy endings. And the reason why people love Aliens is because it's probably one out of two movies that has a happy ending. And Alien Resurrection was the other movie that has a happy ending, and no one likes that movie. So I just I just think that people are wanting something really unreasonable. Aliens is a great movie. It can't be compared to anything else, and anything that tries to make a revival or a comeback for it is going to be pale in comparison. Just like the new Ghostbusters movie. I love the Ghostbusters franchise so much, but I did not like the new movies. I understand what they tried to do, and it just didn't work. And I feel like that if they did that with Alien 5, or if they did this with a retreading of Aliens or a reboot or something, I would not like it. Sorry to go on that rant. I'm just really passionate about.
No, it's my about that.
I think that you're right, Clara. I just think that I don't think people expect the unreasonable. People just, and I've said this, I know I'm a broken record. People just want a character to believe in, and they don't have one, and so they're pivoting back to what's comfortable. And I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying that's what people are doing. That's what I'm doing, for better or for worse.
I will say that I did read the Alien 3 Gibson unproduced script comic book, issue number 1 today, which we maybe at the end we can kind of touch on that.
No spoilers.
I did. No spoilers. But everybody knows the story pretty much. And I did get chills seeing certain characters having survived. So I'm not immune to that as a fan. Like I understand and I have fought with the fact that Alien 3 is so devastatingly hard to watch for my whole life, and that's part of why I love it so much. Is the journey that it's taken me on as a fan. That you go from Aliens, which basically ends with the ultimate triumph, right? It is the epitome of good overcoming evil, you know? And then right away in Alien 3, which was made, you know, only a handful of years later, but in a vastly different world environment, in a vastly different geopolitical system, and in a vastly less, you know, I mean, it came on the heels of a lot of different, you know, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, all these different things going on in culture, and the world was a very different place when, you know, 1992 rolled around than the mid-'80s. And so I think that we, as a fandom, had to go through that journey to appreciate Aliens in a more lasting way, because now we can see it in contrast with what came before and what came after, and that is why it's relevant, and that's why it's not blockbusterism. That's why it's not just this sort of tentpole action movie. You know, obviously it's more than that in the way that it's made, but I do think that we would look at it differently had it been the first of many of these blockbustery, big set-piece sort of action films where, you know, good triumphs over evil every time. I think we had to have evil destroying good right at the beginning of Alien 3, and then good winning in a very small but extraordinarily deep way at the end of Alien 3 for that trilogy to work. And I think that's what locked it into place for me for the rest of my life, you know, was that the relationship between those three films. So I don't mean to get
don't
off track.
You guys think, though, a little bit that Aliens perhaps set up this, it almost set the rest of the series up for failure in some ways? Because how do you not top it, but how do you even get to that level? And I think that's been one difficulty. You know, the courageous thing to do, which is also the thing that pissed everyone off, or a lot of people, was Alien 3. Well, let's not go there. Let's do a different thing. Let's tell a different story. Let's make this more realistic, like Clara was saying. But at the same time, I think that Aliens also, you know, I mean, it's considered one of the best sequels of all time. How do you make another film that reaches that? I don't know if is that even possible.
Well, and I think that's evident from the number of scripts that we get for Alien 3 and the constant process of trying to figure out something that works and something that's going to impact people as much. And like Patrick was saying, that you had to raise a bar, and raising that bar happened to be one of the most tragic things you could possibly do with Aliens. And I think with the Gibson script, as nice as it is, it feels a bit dated, and maybe at the time and now it feels a bit dated with the Cold War aspect to it. I guess what I'm trying to say is I understand why Alien 3 did what it did, because, like Jamie, what you're saying, Aliens is such a magnificent triumph of a film, and story-wise and everything, that, like you said, it's so hard to top.
You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Jamie, and I think that it is actually impossible to set out to make a better film than a film that's a masterpiece when it's already in the pipeline of a franchise like that. And I think you have to allow accidents to happen, and you have to be the sort of temperament and the sort of person and working for the sort of studio that allows accidents to flourish into beautiful new avenues. And I'm thinking a lot, I know you and I have been talking about this, Orson Welles' final film was recently released, and it's on Netflix, which is fucking amazing. And there's a documentary made about the process of making his final movie that's also on Netflix. It's called They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. And he says something that I can't get out of my head right in the beginning of it, because you know, he was pretty self-effacing, which is amazing considering what a titanic genius he was. You know, but he was pretty honest with this awareness that a lot of the successes that he's had have come about as a result of things going wrong and having to deal with it, and that he actually ended up having a lot of faith in that process as he grew as a filmmaker, you know, because all of his big successes were basically in the first 40 years of his life, you know. And then after that, he had to kind of allow fate to play a role and allow accidents to happen and adapt to them. And then some miraculous stuff came out of that. I think it's a similar situation when you have a blockbuster franchise like this, where if you set out to do this masterpiece by the book, by the numbers, in my head I'm going into Aliens dialogue again, but by the numbers, and you set out to make basically a movie that is just building on the success of the previous entry in the franchise, I don't think it will work, because I think half of your audience will be going there to have their expectations subverted, and half the audience will be going there to have their expectations doubled down upon, and neither of them will be happy because there will be a mixture of both of those things. I think you have to have a crazy serendipitous event happen, like Alien 3, which, sure, it went through a lot of rewrites on a lot of different creative teams, but also, at the end of the day, as we covered pretty extensively, like, the final shooting script was a complete nightmare of a Frankenstein thing that was cobbled together, using duct tape and cigarettes, like, it was something that took all of these weird elements of something, and the shoot was already going on, and they already had the budget, and people were already shooting, and there were sets that were already built, and the cinematographer was sick, and all these different things were going on, and they were like, we have to make this movie, let's just fucking do it. And because, for whatever reason, Giler and Hill and then Fincher were of a temperament, or of a time when they were more receptive to accidents happening, we got this thing that's a masterpiece, that's really revealed itself as a masterpiece over the years. So I don't know how you do it intentionally. I don't know how you get a Blade Runner 2049 on purpose, although they did. it's pretty amazing.
I think they approached 2049 the way that they should have, which was, we're not setting out to make a better film, we're setting out to make a different film that honors the film. But I'm to pivot back to Aliens, though, and I guess I'll throw this question out there for everyone. I think maybe even with the prequels, and we've seen how the reception is so mixed, and violent, and passionate, but there's no real consensus. Aliens, I wonder if, and this is kind of weird to say, but I feel like the prequels might have fared better without Aliens. The prequels are a little bit more in line with Alien than they are with Aliens. And I think Aliens is so monolithic and so impactful and continually in the conscious and subconscious of all of us. I don't know. I mean, we're hearing rumors that maybe the Alien series is going to be about the Colonial Marines, and I think that probably a great idea, but at the same time, they probably think that's the only route to go, because all these other routes that they've gone haven't really produced much revenue, which is kind of really what it's all about at the end of the day. But and as much as we're celebrating Aliens for this 40 Miles of Bad Road series, I also think it's been a roadblock for the series, and I'm curious what like Conar and Sean, what you guys think.
Personally, I would disagree with that. I think the reason the prequels, you can say failed, whether or not people like them or not. I compare them to Alien and Aliens, I'm sure they got a much bigger box office, and I would say they've made more money, but that's a bit unfair considering how long they've been out. But the fact that the prequels aren't looked back as fondly as Aliens or Alien, there's many other factors. I don't think that Aliens comes directly into play. You look at the characters, are they well written? And don't compare it just to Aliens, compare them on their own merit. And I don't necessarily agree that they are. I think you can't really slate Aliens for being too good for the franchise when the prequels by themselves on their own merit, not taken into account anything from Aliens, wasn't up to par. Like, the idea was there, and I can see the direction that they were trying to take with Prometheus, and that's why I agree. Personally, I think that Prometheus is better than Covenant. Another hot take there. But you look at both those movies, and they're both flawed in their own way. I personally enjoy all of them, but they're flawed movies. Whereas you look at Aliens, you look at what flaws there are in Aliens, there's not that many at all, if any. In my eyes, it's close to being the perfect movie. I don't think the reason that the prequels failed was because Aliens was so good. I think if the prequels were written correctly, developed characters, because as you've also mentioned before, that we want someone we can care about and invest in. And these prequels haven't given us that. And that's no fault because of Ripley being so good in Aliens. It's the fact that they've not written Daniels. We don't really care about Daniels, or Shaw for that matter. I can't see how you can. I mean, I can understand what you're trying to say, and Aliens did set the bar up extremely high, and for anything to beat that is going to be, I'll be impressed if anything ever does, in my eyes, to be honest. But I don't think that the failure or the perceived failure of the prequels can be put down to Aliens, because they didn't do their job correctly in the prequels, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think the problem with the prequels was just Prometheus as a whole, because Prometheus itself is such a shaky movie. Like, everything is just so disjointed, you can't make any sense of it. But then you have Covenant after that, which is, it's a better movie, but it was built on shaky foundations. And like Sean said, I mean, you could have done better writing on certain parts of it. And the whole fact that the alien's only in it at the very end, which generally cinema goers will want to just go and see the film for not just the alien, but as one of the main focal points. I'll agree that Aliens is pretty much a behemoth. There's probably no surpassing it, no matter what you do. But I don't think that means that it's a roadblock. It just means that you don't have to make a better movie, you just make a good one. It's the thing that annoys me so much with this series is, okay, prequels, it was an interesting idea, but any fucking writer worth their salt could have written a sequel after Alien 3 and like that. That's just what I don't understand. And sure enough, it doesn't have to be this big bombastic movie like what Aliens was, but build upon it. I mean, Ripley's dead, sure, yeah, but it doesn't mean you need her to continue the series like what we did with Resurrection. Just respect her legacy and move on from that. I think that's really the whole problem, but it's such a problem that I think is easy to fix.
They're trying to recreate her over and over, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and it just disrespects her character even more.
I think partly why Covenant, in my eyes, failed was they marketed it as an alien movie. At least with Prometheus, it's obviously within the alien universe, but it wasn't out there as an alien movie. It was kind of put out there as what happens before Alien. Whereas with Alien, like they kind of changed directions mid-movie, between movies rather. And it's like, is this meant to be an Aliens thing, or is this a prequel to Aliens? And the moment they changed it, because it was going to be called something else, I can't remember. Was it like Paradise
Lost?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. The moment they changed it to Aliens, in my eyes, that was a big mistake. That they shouldn't have written the xenomorph in Covenant to be so strong. Like, to me, that's kind of Alien is when the alien becomes an identity and something we see, we're familiar with. For me, the idea of the prequels, and this is why I quite like Prometheus, is it was trying to explore you as to what was, the space jockey and Alien, and it was kind of a build-up towards that. And then the change of direction between the movies, that really, well, personally, that shunted me off, and I've always preferred Prometheus over Covenant. But we're getting a bit sidetracked here.
But I'm wondering though if Aliens, as a sequel and a part of a series, I feel like it's also the film that is every other film in the genre of science fiction that has come out since is measured up to. And it's hard to get science fiction. It's hard to get a good science fiction film that's really well made, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And there are very few that are successful. I mean, and even the ones that, for instance, like I love Annihilation, Patrick does too, but there are people up there who'd be like, oh no, it's terrible because of blah, 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 blah. There's always,
but
it's hard to get
they're wrong though. That's
I agree.
Very, very, very wrong.
So wrong.
Oh, totally wrong.
God damn you!
But I feel like in terms of even I don't know. I mean, we could just pick a science fiction film out of that's come out since then and say, has it measured up? And there's a little bit of a reflection in there. I mean, even the AVP films. I know that They're kind of a different.
Fuck.
Well, I'm not trying to talk about it, but like AVP Requiem, they kind of bring Ripley back, and they're modeling it after Aliens, and other films that are set, like for instance, there's a film called, oh my God, it's I think it was shot in Australia, Infinity. You guys know what I'm talking about?
No.
INFI or something like
the
that.
car company?
Very similar to Aliens. Very similar setup. Deals with kind of an alien threat on some other place. You could really hear and feel aliens in it, but of course it wasn't Aliens. And I just see that so much, and I feel like the reach of Aliens is in everything. Everyone's kind of comparing it to something else.
And it's so dominant,
I'd agree with that.
It's something, for much of the 19th century in classical music, there was what they called the Beethoven effect, which was basically like Beethoven's legacy was so monumental that after his death, there was like a big drop in the compositional output of Western Europe because people felt like they couldn't do anything to measure up to him. And so nobody really knew what to write. And it took sort of a new generation of composers to break out under that. And I think Aliens, in a way, is similar. I think Aliens was such a triumph from an artistic standpoint, and such a triumph from a storytelling standpoint, and such a triumph from a box office standpoint that, I mean, you're totally right, Connor. Most writers worth their salt could have written a better version of Alien Resurrection, right? Like most good screenwriters could have given us good movies, right?
Yeah,
the problem, except Joss Whedon's not a good screenwriter. Anyway.
Well, that's a separate conversation. But the reality is that it's not just one screenwriter, one like artiste doing this. These are movies that are made in a studio that is dependent on revenue, and Aliens was a watershed for that. Aliens was such a success, and it took what had been a very hard R, very frightening franchise and made it palatable to young people, without making it feel watered down. And it set a template, So I think it's worth pointing out that I agree with Jamie. Not so much in terms of quality, because I don't think it's because Aliens was a masterpiece. It was a masterpiece. I think that's beside the point. The point is that an entire generation of people were basically brought into the franchise and to fandom watching this particular movie, which was nothing like, in most ways, the first film, and nothing like the films that came after it. And so for a lot of people out there who aren't here in the middle of the night on an Alien fan podcast, most of the world, when they think of an Alien movie, they're thinking of Aliens. And every time they see something that's not that, they're sort of going, well, okay, I guess that's
that's
what
that.
we're getting.
Yeah.
And I'm not making a judgment call on that. I just think that's the case.
The only film in the franchise where you can, I mean, not the only film, but arguably you can get all your friends together and you're going to watch Aliens and have a party. You're not going to do that with Alien 3.
Party!
I beg to differ, but
it's a rallying call. It's a rallying call for science fiction lovers. And again, I'm not like saying, oh my God, Aliens has made it so terrible because I love Alien 3. Again, there's parts of the prequels that I love. We wouldn't have those films without Aliens, all of that stuff. But I feel like it is almost insurmountable in some ways. Like, I wonder if we're always going to be set up for failure.
Dumbass comments.
What's this crap supposed to be?
Cornbread, I think.
It's good for you, boy. Eat it.
Hey, you sure wouldn't mind getting some more of that Arcturian poontang? Remember that time?
Yeah, Frost, the one that you had was male.
It don't matter when it's Arcturian, baby.
I do have to say, Mike, you just hosted an Alien 3 viewing party, didn't you?
I did, yeah. We went through every Alien movie. Not in one night,
but you did all. Okay, you did all of them. And what were your experiences with that? Like how people responded to the different films?
It was awesome. Alien was people really liked it. Aliens, like I said, was kind of like, yeah, that was good, but I liked Alien better. And then we got to Alien 3, and it was pretty much split right down the middle. People either really loved it or they were like, it was boring, I didn't like it. And we didn't bother with Alien Resurrection, but we watched Prometheus and Covenant.
Good
and,
man.
Alien Resurrection.
That movie
I mean,
doesn't
we're
exist.
saving it for like a drinking night. You know, like we'll drink every time some inappropriate humor happens, or something like that.
There's gonna be smoke coming out of Clara's ears at the moment.
Yeah.
Severely
she's a good
fuckable.
But Covenant people loved, and actually one of my friends who never gives like a 10 out of 10 rating he's given one other movie that, and he thought Covenant was a 10 out of 10. So
Really?
and that's crazy, right? Yeah, exactly. No, there. It's like when we have history like this with the Alien series, to hear that is like almost sacrilege, right? And the Aliens was like people were kind of indifferent to it is for me too. Like even though I'm not a huge Aliens fan, I appreciate it a lot and I enjoy watching it. But to hear people now say like they just didn't really care about aliens very much, and I had people say like, oh, the Marines are too much of a caricature and they're not interesting and you barely hear from any of them. And I even hear people say Hudson is annoying, which I could see, but I definitely don't agree with.
It wasn't funny, man.
And there's just
he's like the Michelangelo Ninja Turtle character a little.
Do you think though, Mike, that reaction is because people are so it's so in the public consciousness? We've seen so many versions of that since Aliens that people are seeing the film that it started where it started, but they don't realize it. So it's kind of pastiche to them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I think we even talked about it, like about that exact idea after the movie, because I tell everybody, I'm like, okay, most people would agree Aliens is the best one. And I don't say anything else. I don't give out like what I think of it or anything. I'm just like, okay, well in the fandom, people really, really like Aliens. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And then boom, this happened and people didn't really get on board, which was weird. Has anyone experienced that with people they show it to?
Well, I had a kind of the opposite experience recently. I've been watching it with the in-laws, the whole series, and they did not like Alien very much. So actually, my mother-in-law's dad had a heart attack when he saw Alien in theaters, and so she kind of has always had like a thing about it. She didn't want to like.
Oh my god!
Revisit it. He actually did have a heart attack.
Shit. I don't want to laugh, but that's.
I mean, he's fine.
Like
he's still alive.
It's not funny. It's just like, oh my god.
But part of me is like what? And what was his diet? I mean, he was like 35 at the time. I'm like, come on, it's not that scary. But he did. So she kind of had avoided it for a long time, and I watched it with her recently, and she thought it was scary. She thought it was really interesting, but she was like checking her phone. It was like not like fully engaged. But Aliens, okay. I mean, she's very much a mid-'80s. Like when we go to my in-laws' house, we're gonna watch Indiana Jones, we're gonna watch Star Wars, we're gonna watch basically the 80s tentpole things. And Aliens was an immediate hit with her and with my brother-in-law and with my father-in-law. They were all like totally cued into it. But also, other than my brother-in-law, they're of a different generation. They basically hit adulthood when this movie was being made, and I think that it was basically made in some ways for them, So that could be part of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I used to work at a video store called Crazy Mike's. Yeah, it was not my name. But,
it's Crazy Mike's!
Yeah, oh man, side note, that happened at least once every day.
You didn't bring the mic into Crazy Mike, did you? You brought the crazy into Crazy Mike.
Everybody duck his back!
You better get your videos in on time or I'll come to your house. I have your address.
I can't repeat a dish.
Yeah, I was notorious for that.
Oh, man, I hate you. That sucks. No, but we went through, me and my coworkers, my old coworkers there, went through the Alien movies again with some of their friends, and they're all, in their 30s. And they appreciated Aliens more than my group did, who are my age, 22, 23, in that area. And yeah, I think you're right, Patrick. I think it has something to do with generations. But it sometimes doesn't, it sometimes doesn't, right? Because I think you can appreciate Aliens no matter what generation you're in. But going back to that Vietnam War aspect and power through superior firepower, right? I don't know. It's an interesting topic, and I don't really know what else to say about it.
Well, I think to your point, though, Mike, I think that in some ways, and it's just kind of some issue that I've had with Aliens that I don't have anymore, but I did for a while. There's this very American love affair with the military. I would say it's probably that scale's probably tipped. Like it's a little bit the level of like patriotism or just how kind of crazy people go over the military. I think Aliens kind of embodies that American sense of the military. Yeah, we're behind you. Like everyone's kind of like rah rah. And Aliens, you can kind of join in that experience while watching the film, where everyone's together and they're all American. I mean, I think they are in Aliens, and so it really speaks to a time and place where America was at the time, and I think the different generational reactions to it is because I think that like today, I think people view it differently today because that love affair isn't the same as it used to be. We've been in quite a few more wars, and very dubious wars that were started for whatever reason that weren't quite honest. So we don't feel the same way about the military anymore. It was an idyllic time in the American kind of history.
Ooh, right to ashes.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, what is that? Colonial Marines.
Fucking line.
I knew that would get you.
Well, and Aliens that's so funny because Aliens is such like it's supposed to be anti-war, right? And Jeanette Goldstein and Sigourney Weaver both hate guns, and they didn't want to. Sigourney Weaver, I remember talking about it all the time about how she didn't really care to wield them or anything. She thought they were stupid. And the whole movie is like why that oorah to ashes bullshit doesn't work, and it's not real. It's all a fantasy. It's funny that's something that you would like. Not that you're wrong, Jamie. It's just that is an interesting like view for people to have, right?
Well, and I just think that some of the criticism I have or have had, I mean, even though I agree Aliens is a masterpiece and I watched it over and over almost every day as a kid, as a teenager, but I also took it to task a little bit that I was a little bit too patriotic. It was a little divisive in a way, like that it was kind of leaning on that as opposed to, and it kind of played into this kind of, I don't know, this a little bit phony sense of I'm an American. You know what I mean? Like we are important because we're Americans and our military. Like that's the problems I had with Aliens because I didn't really understand it. I have a different understanding of it now, but we're not in the same place that we used to be. I mean, and I'm not saying these are good or bad things, or I'm even correct in these assessments. These are just things that I've kind of noticed myself over the years.
But what's so funny is that that's not really what the movie's saying. You know, it's interesting. I think it's so easy for us to think of Aliens as the jingoistic oorah, we can kill them with more firepower, but it's really not. Like when we say it's a Vietnam allegory, it's literally a Vietnam allegory. Like we are outnumbered, or we're completely outmatched by enemies that we should have the handle on. And I think in a lot of ways, it was a critique of that aspect of American society coming out of the 70s and into the 80s. I think in a lot of ways it was pretty biting criticism of Reagan era United States politics. Cold War, hyper-capitalist, laissez-faire kind of this approach to our country, which now feels pretty dated in a lot of ways. And I think at that time, this movie was a little bit of foreshadowing of some of the issues that we were setting ourselves up for, as things happen. Like, we got into these intractable wars, like you mentioned, which we're still fighting now. The economy's blown up, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have to get into that. But I think in a lot of ways, it's easy to think of it as a simpler movie or more direct corollary to the world at the time than it actually is. I think in a lot of ways, it's really almost a satire of it.
Yeah, which kind of opens the door to like people like Sean and Conar and Clara, who of course aren't American and don't have kind of our worldview and how that plays out for them.
I have to say, like, there was one thing I had a viewing party as well as one friend of mine who was younger. That was the point he made about aliens. He was like, they were very gung ho, weren't they? It was like, it's what you said, Jamie. They were very American. It was like, I don't actually remember a single line where they ever said, like, yeah, we're American. They just said we're Marines. That's it. And the point of the matter is, like, if you're in any position like that in the military where you're dropping out of space in a flying metal can, going into a place you have no clue about an enemy that you've just heard this description of this woman who is terrified of them, you're going to need to be positive in some fashion to just get yourself in there. And I think it's still relevant today, actually, concerning what's been going on in the world. I mean, we're still going into wars against enemies that are less at a technological advantage, and we're still getting thrashed by them. And we're still in the same dirty politics that revolve around it. I mean, that's one thing as well about aliens that no one really mentions as much as Burke. He's just an avatar of what's wrong politically in the world as well. And still today, I think.
I have to agree that the whole Americanized war and the allegory with Vietnam wasn't something that I could really connect to previously, because I've got no knowledge of it outside of what we learned at school, which is like very minimal. It's like there was a war, it didn't work, they lost, we ended up with all of the asylum seekers, so for me it was very, very different, and I think Aliens is very much playing on the sort of satire, the same way that Starship Troopers does, and a lot of people miss that. The pointlessness of war, the machine that people get pulled into, everyone is expendable, and it's all, at the end of the day, part of that sort of like capitalist machine. When Carter Burke refers to the whole mission, he's not talking about saving the colonists. He's talking about the value of the planet and the property that they're on, and they shouldn't blow it up because it's going to be worth a lot of money to the company. The xenomorphs are going to be worth a lot of money to the company, and it never comes into his mind that
substantial
human
dollar value.
That never comes into his mind that any of that human life holds a value. And even Ripley, which is like one of the most quoted lines of hers, is, you don't see them screwing each other over for $1 or something like that. So for me, it was very much about how the company and the way that human life is treated, even in building the colony, even before the aliens get there. People are just there to terraform the planet. They don't talk about building a community or anything like that. And even I found that very much so when I was reading River of Pain. Everyone was a cog in the machine, and if you weren't playing your part, you weren't useful. It was very much about making sure that people are making money or making progress in the company or getting promoted or doing something like that. It's never about, we're doing this for the betterment of mankind, if you get what I mean. It's all very like singular, short-sighted, and everyone's in it for themselves.
Which is interesting, like, I think, and this is to a point both that you're making, Clara, and Conar, like, in terms of Carter Burke and his importance. And really, you're right, no one really talks about Burke. Yeah, he's this slimy bad guy. He's got, he's got the dollar on the mind. How can we get rich? How does the company get rich? What do we do? I mean, really, Carter is the Ash of Aliens. But really, if we think about it, Carter represents, or Burke represents, politicians. And we all, I think, live in countries where politicians put human life and the well-being or the welfare of human life on a very on the bottom rung, because they need to get paid first. And that's something that actually the alien universe has never really, except for in Aliens, has explored. I mean, and there's elements of it in Alien. Of course, they know that there's an order and they have to bring back the creature. Everyone's expendable, and Burke is a little bit representing that. But really, Burke is this cipher or avatar for many things that are happening today in America, in the UK, everything that's kind of going on. And it's something that I think even in future films, if we want to talk about, I mean, obviously we're not here to talk about like possible sequels. We're talking about Aliens, but that's a character that everyone can identify with. Everyone's kind of been either seen them on TV or been in a room with someone like that where they just don't care. They're out for themselves. They're out for money. And really, Burke was the alien in that situation. Burke was the most evil. Burke was there. He was in there, and he looked like one of us, but he certainly wasn't acting like one of us. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, he was certainly the eighth passenger Aliens because of the first half of the movie before they get on the planet. He's all very supportive of Ripley, but it's only after the shit hits the fan that you really see his true colours.
That's true, but at the same time, part of me wonders if going in deeper into the company would set us up for another situation where we would be wondering why they're not telling new stories. You know, I agree that that's such a fascinating angle, in that that's something that's really socially relevant and probably will always be relevant, unfortunately. But again, it's something that we've seen at least somewhat in Aliens, and it was handled really deftly. And I'm not really sure how that would play out.
Yeah, well, it'd probably play out just as well as someone looking into an egg again.
You shit on Covenant. It was not. Listen, it was not a person looking into an egg. It was Orm looking into an egg, and it makes sense for that character to do that ridiculous thing.
Well, I think that you can explore. I mean, I think that in terms of, as we talk about like the effects of Aliens and the litmus test that the film is, and we're going to kind of move on from that, or hopefully tell another story that's going to be a series. You can certainly explore Weyland-Yutani and find out what's going on in this company. Peel back that curtain just a little bit, and really find out what is this company? What is politically? Who are they? Are they like the Tyrell Corporation? Are they like the Wallace Corporation? Do they own everything? Have they helped to save humanity? Do they call the shots? Is there a government still in place? Is Weyland-Yutani the government? I mean, there's so many questions that can be answered. I mean, what did Burke really represent?
I gotta say, the thing that's dealt the most with that, and I'll make this quick because I think Clara was about to say something, has been Alien Covenant Origins, and that's the most abominable piece of shit I've ever read in my life.
I knew someone was going to bring it up, and
it was by Alan Dean Foster, who is a master of writing books about this universe, and he doubled down on a book about exactly that. And I think I can all say it, on behalf of all of us that I almost threw it out the window. OTBD.
To be honest, I couldn't finish that. I just could not finish that.
It took me 2 months. Fucking months.
But how do you write a novel called, was it Origins, but there's no aliens in it? Like, what the fuck? Doesn't even make any sense.
I think the problem is the sort of guidelines that were given by Fox to Alan Dean Foster, because originally Alan Dean Foster thought he was going to be writing the origins of Prometheus and going to be talking about David and Shaw, but obviously he was told not to touch that sort of storyline, so he had to come up with something else. So this would have been, the merging of the company and the origins for the Covenant mission. What I think, and I think it did it well, was Alien: The Cold Forge, because it still talked about the company, but they also talked about Seegson. It talked about corporate warfare. You had a Burke-like character in Dorian. You still had the aliens, and you still had a character who pretty much looked like they had everything stacked against them to lose, and we had that with Newt. So I felt that was a very good way of mixing the Alien and the Aliens universe together, if you get what I mean.
I do. Very much.
Yeah.
And I agree. You can tell by the fan response to the Cold Forge that is obviously something people have an appetite for. But something else that people have an appetite for in fandom, more than probably any other product that's come out in the last 15 or 20 years in fandom, you can all, on the count of three, I think we can say is 1, 2, 3, Alien Isolation. Everybody fucking loves Alien Isolation, as do I.
Alien Isolation.
Right?
Yeah.
The sound had to travel around the world. I feel like that to me is basically a universally beloved property in Alien. And it is, in most ways, virtually a facsimile of the first film. Like the ways in which it deviates are brilliant, but at the end of the day, it's really experiencing the first movie again. And I think we have to look at ourselves and wonder why did that work so well? And what is it about the Cold Forge, which in a lot of ways is, the Cold Forge is interesting because that is an example of, as Clara was saying, having kind of like new takes on tropes that we're used to. So, I mean, there's a vast distance between Carter Burke and Dorian in Cold Forge, you know what I mean? But they're both kind of these ciphers for the company. But they're treated very differently. And so maybe part of it is giving us things that we have a framework for, that we have a context for, and then doing something wildly different with it, I think that could be something that could work.
The thing with Isolation, though, is that... sorry, Sean, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's actually quite sad that, since Aliens was probably the last, most popular movie. And since then, probably the two projects which have been universally praised as much as, well, maybe not as much as Aliens, but has had a general positive reaction has been these two projects you're talking about, Isolation and Cold Forge. You look at Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, the AVP, the prequels, they're all mixed. You do find people who love each movie, which is brilliant. You find a lot of people who don't like certain movies, which is understandable. But these two projects are probably the most popular things since Aliens. If only we could kind of get that magic and have that as a movie. I don't know how they do it, but get that kind of magic where everyone just seems to love it. You got characters, which both Isolation and Cold Forge has. It's got other aspects, the company, and both of these projects. But things are just well written for both, which is something I feel has been lacking since Aliens. Although I do appreciate Alien 3, I'm not shitting on that. That's, I think, what's key, and what goes back to what Jamie was saying about the bar being so high in Aliens is I think a huge amount of that it comes down to the writing process.
Well, and I think another product that I think comes up a lot in fandom, and this is another one we can count on, but because of the time delay, it might not work, but is Labyrinth. I think that is a comic that people always bring up when you ask people what their favorite adaptations of, or not adaptations, but what their favorite non-film takes on Alien are. Labyrinth is always on the list. And for me, as a kid, it was my favorite comic. It probably still is to this day. Although Dust to Dust, in my mind, isn't nearly as good. But Labyrinth, both the novel and the comic, it's just fucking amazing storytelling, and very much the same thing where it kind of goes deeper into a thematic area that we've gotten a little bit of a taste of in the films, and maybe that's the answer is give us something we have a context for and go crazy with it,
And I think the success of Aliens, in terms of we're going to see. Because I think that kind of hitting back on an earlier sort of topic, like with Blomkamp and trying to kind of rekindle that flame of Aliens, I think setting, much like, but also like with Isolation, you can set a film in the world of Aliens, with the tech of Aliens, and that kind of, I don't know, just that very specific aesthetic that we love and that we're used to. And we can tell a story that is within the universe that we know with different characters. Maybe they kind of reference to something else. Maybe they reference the Hadley's Hope mission or hearing about someone named Ripley or whatever. And it can be really, really successful without having to repeat what we've seen before, but kind of off in a new direction.
Something really brief on that I want to bring up that you said is the technology aspect. To me, the tactile nature of the tech in Alien is part of what I love about the film. And for some reason, I absolutely have always just really loved that. And Aliens is the same thing. When they slap the cartridge in for the pulse rifle, the sound design is so immersive. When the pods open and close, when the power loader hydraulics fire, it just feels like, you can like it's dangerous. Like if one of these things fell on you, you could be seriously injured, And I don't see that in the prequels. I really truly don't. As much as I love Covenant, I don't see it in Covenant in any real way. I think that's a big thing. And I think Isolation, it almost fetishizes that aspect. Like, it is so tactile. And like one of the great examples of that is how you save the game. Like, you have to, for one thing, make yourself vulnerable while the save sequence is going, which is a wonderful mechanic. But also, like, it's you have to like shove this card in the hole and press a key sequence, and it beeps, and it just feels
It's like going into Mother.
It feels very lived in. Yeah, exactly. And Cold Forge, part of what's so great about that is, given Alex White's design, his background in designing user experiences, like, it fetishizes the user experience of navigating this space station. Like, he goes into such detail about, the light systems in the floor, and about the sequences you have to punch in to get to certain subdecks, and about the elevators and all these different things, and the portholes, and what you can see out from different sides of the ship as it rotates. And it just feels so real. It just feels so mechanical. And I think something that we're missing, and something that Aliens really got right in terms of sequels, is that there is an aesthetic, I think, to Alien that it's important to not make excuses constantly for not using. I find myself frequently in a position where I'm talking about the prequels where I'm having to defend them because I'm typically in an argument setting, as you all know. But I can completely relate to that. Like, I hate the fact that I'm always apologizing for the fact that Prometheus, even, which I don't even like, has such vastly different technology because, and then I talk about how, well, it was the ship was for a different purpose. It was, this privatized, incredible industry. It was basically a personal vessel for this multi-trillionaire, and he can make it look however he wanted to. It wasn't, it wasn't Truckers in Space. But at the end of the day, like, I don't care. Like, I miss Truckers in Space. That's what I want to see, And to me, when you take that away, even though it suits the story, it hews more closely to something that it's not. And to me, Alien is not Star Trek, And I think that's an important distinction.
I just want to say, though, that one of one of the things that I really love about sci-fi is the way it's able to breed innovation through imagination. And even though I do love the aesthetic of the cassette futurism, which Alien presents, and I really do like the sort of like 80s stylized technology in Aliens, I believe going forward in general for science fiction that it doesn't really matter in terms of aesthetic, because as long as it's well written, and as long as the technology interacts with the characters in the way the story has intended, it shouldn't affect it at all. It all comes down to the way the characters are written and the way the characters interact with that technology. And I think because a lot of people have watched Alien and Aliens many, many times, they tend to forget the sort of technology that was also presented in Alien 3, which was a rundown facility, and then in Alien Resurrection, which is supposed to be 200 years into the future after Alien 3. And, who's a professional specialist on the way technology is supposed to look in 2093. I think that by making the prequels a little bit more relevant and updating the technology, it kind of gives the Alien universe the freedom to go between these different sorts of aesthetics, because it doesn't come down to that. That's not the way the story is driven. Like even the interaction with Mother in Alien Covenant versus the interaction in Alien, I feel it's still quite relevant, and having it updated so it kind of reflects this technology that we have now, it's going to make these movies altogether more watchable for future generations, and not just for people who could recollect the 80s. Because I've even had like people go to me, look at floppy disk. It's like, oh, someone 3D printed the save symbol. They don't even realize that they're the person holding a floppy disk. So to make all of this stuff more relevant for the future generations that are going to be introduced to this sort of universe, as much as I do love the aesthetic of Alien, I don't think it should dictate the entire universe, because sooner or later we're not going to have access to that sort of the sort of technology to be able to put into those films, and it's going to be painstaking to try to replicate that.
Well, then I guess I think that it's not necessarily the aesthetic. It's not necessarily the cassette futurism, although I think, speaking just totally personally and subjectively, that's part of it. But I think in general it's the realism and the verisimilitude that provides. It's something about, we live in an age where everything that we see on film, 80 to 90% of it in most big Hollywood pictures is purely digital, right? And I'm not making a judgment call on that. I understand that that's just the world that we live in, and that's how you make blockbuster movies now, is you shoot on green screen, and you composite so many things in that I don't know. I don't even know at what point it becomes an animated movie and what point it doesn't. And to me, what's so great about the original trilogy is that it feels real, and I feel like it will always feel real, even if it's not real. And even though we're being just as lied to in those as we are in new movies, like, you're totally right. In the first film, there are people sitting, with PVC tubes, banging them in a hallway to make it sound like Ripley's running, and there's only one level on the set, and obviously, and we have all seen the behind the scenes features about how they faked the perspective so it looks like she's going up and down ladders. Like, we get that, I totally understand that we're fundamentally being lied to when we watch a movie, but the ways in which we're lied to, I think it changed the experience of watching it. And to me, when I see a movie like Covenant, which I love, when I see Covenant, I am not getting that same appreciation of the real that I get in the other movies. And I think part of it's because it's digital, but part of it, I think, is because the technology that they're using is by virtue of, advances that we've had in our own culture with things like, flat screens and capacitive interfaces and things. It's not as tactile. And for whatever reason, when you put tactility in a fantastical futuristic setting, whether or not that results in an aesthetic like cassette futurism or not, you get something really special. And that specialness, to me, is something at the heart of Alien. And to your point, Patrick, and to push back a little bit on you, Clara, I think if I think about films that people love, not just the Alien films or Aliens or whatever, but the films that really have this really great reception and cult followings, and we're all in these same groups, whether it's Blade Runner or Aliens or Star Wars or whatever. What do we see from people who love these films? They're trying to get replicas of this. They're trying to make this. They're trying to get that. Clara, you do it with like Covenant and with the Neomorphs, and we're always kind of trying to bring a little bit of a piece of this film that we love, or films that we love, home with us or on our shelf. And I think Aliens offers that. You see people trying to get whether they're building models of the motion trackers or the guns or some of the helmets or building life-size versions of the power loader and going to cons, conventions dressed up. You see that all the time with films that people really love that have made an indelible impression upon, generations of people. The films that people, and I think Aliens, not so much even the tech, but I really feel like when people are doing that, it speaks to exactly what kind of impression this film has made. I don't know any film that isn't well loved where people are trying to get, like replica props made.
I don't know any film like films that bomb or films that, are kind of get at this really crazy, passionately mixed reaction. I don't see people, I'm trying to get this thing from The Last Jedi or whatever. But I think Alien and Aliens specifically, not even Alien 3, because I love it. It's a connection. Those things, those tactile things, the things that they use. It's not so much even about the tech of the 80s, but those things are a vehicle for people to kind of experience the movie more. And that's what that's.
So you mean like, so the pulse rifle, the motion tracker, that sort of stuff. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And I don't, and obviously in Prometheus or Covenant, there's none of those things, and I don't mean that same type of tech. There's none of that kind of stuff that we're like, oh my god, I got to get my hands on that.
I do agree, because the guns in Prometheus, that, like, for example, in Aliens, the pulse rifle, it's kind of a character of its own. Everyone recognizes it. It has a certain noise, and you're right that there's a certain character interaction with it, like putting in the rounds, but there wasn't that sort of interaction in Prometheus, and the only item that I felt like there was that sort of relationship with the character and the firearm they were using was the flamethrower, and that was when Vickers was using it. So you're correct, and I feel that that's kind of part of the writing. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's a letdown of the design itself, but it's the way the characters interact with that item, and that's like the what do you call it? The I've forgotten the name. When they've set up those automatic firing
turrets, the sentry turrets, yeah.
Turrets, yeah, sentry turrets in the hallways to stop the xenomorphs. We don't even get to see the turrets working, except for that one time that they threw something and it shot. We are just hearing the turrets work, and I can imagine what's happening, and it forces the person who's watching the film to kind of imagine, the xenomorphs getting like torn up to shreds and stuff like that. So I do agree, but at the same time, it's all about the writing. It's the way that it's been written. These sorts of things kind of interact with the characters and the storyline in a certain way that they become important.
Yeah,
but
and I think.
Go
ahead, Patrick.
Well, it's not just the writing, although I think that's a huge part of it. It's also the creative choices dictated by the limitations of using real objects. For example, the Queen, which we're about to do a full episode on, and which is obviously a huge impact in all of our lives. There were two people working the arms inside of her. There were people off on the side of the set doing the head, doing the mouth. It was a very difficult thing to operate. It was 20 actual feet tall. You know what I mean? And it's something that because of that, it couldn't move in any real way. So they had to create a smaller puppet, and even that they had to use really sparingly. So you ended up getting a lot of the audience's imagination was being piqued more because we were having to imagine this thing moving without seeing it, and seeing it that it looked fake, right? It's setting up this paradigm where it feels like it's a gateway into a larger reality that we can then bring into our own heads. And I still find it infuriating that the incredible puppetry work and costuming in Covenant was not entirely, but largely scrubbed over digitally. And I understand that there are real reasons why they do that, but to me, it speaks of this greater trend towards the vanishing of the tactile and the real, and the embracing of digital technology, and people using digital technology to do things that you can't do with practical effects. And I think the second you do that, you start losing some of the wonderful creative chaos that you kind of need to make art, Like, if I'm writing a piece of music, if somebody says, write it for as many instruments as you can think of, it's going to be a fucking awful piece, But if somebody says, like, oh, I have this violin and I want you to write a piece of music for it, I can feel that violin. I can think about what that violin wants to say. And I think it's the same thing with Cameron and the Queen. Like, he designed this thing, he built it with Stan Winston, and they shot it in very specific ways necessitated by the physical realities of manipulating that object in physical space. And those limitations, I think, gave them tremendous artistic control over the final product and allowed us to put ourselves in the movie much more than more contemporary pictures do.
With the tools that they had, they made the Queen look more believable than they did the Neomorph in Covenant. I watched Covenant and I look at the Neomorph and it just doesn't look real to me. It's almost like it's over digitalized, which to me that seems so backwards. Seeing as the practical effects were done in what 80. The movie was released in 86, so it would have been the Queen would have been filmed 85, maybe beginning of 86. I'm not too sure on the timeline. But given how much resources they had back then, it just blows my mind how creative they were in utilizing the tools that they had at that time compared to what we've got today.
Yeah, I mean, just think it as a funny comparison. And the scene that we never got in Covenant in the trailer, where you see the alien darting from side to side in the corridor, and you couple that with when Ripley goes into the hive and just shoots up the egg that's about to, the facehugger's about to impregnate Newt, and you see that one alien that's actually a guy in a suit fly from side to side, and you can feel the weight going into the wall just by watching it, and it just makes it so much more believable.
I feel like sometimes I agree, the Neomorph didn't look real enough, and in a lot of instances in Covenant, the sound and the visuals did not marry up to make an ideal viewing. It didn't make it immersive enough. But I feel like a lot of people keep on championing practical effects, but they forget how advanced visual effects are. And I think when the studio is given the right budget and the visual effects people are given enough time, they can make a movie completely seamless. And if you guys have watched Gravity and you enjoy it, well, the entire set is CG. None of it is practical. The only thing that is practical is Sandra Bullock, and she is being suspended by ropes. You know what I mean? So
someone hasn't seen First Man.
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
It's amazing.
I haven't
it's all
seen
practical.
that one yet.
Every bit of it is practical. Every space scene, everything. It's amazing.
They actually went into outer space and shot this movie on the surface of the moon. They built an actual moon on Earth, and they filmed it on the actual moon.
I feel like visual effects and practical effects, there's a place for it. And if you go too much in one way or too much in another way, and you don't have the right budget, or you don't have enough time, or you don't have the skilled personnel to be able to execute the vision, then it won't look good anyway. If you get what I mean.
I would agree with you, and I think just to kind of...
Because, Covenant's all practical. The interactions with the screens, all of that was timed. That was all done with software. These aren't overlays. These aren't looping things that are happening. All of it was real time, except for the 3D projections. So that's what I love about it. That's the practical that I see that worked effectively in the movie. And the aliens did not. I agree with that. That they would have gone better with practical, I believe. But there is parts of Covenant that have happened that people, didn't have a problem with, like the EVA scenes going out and repairing the sails. Even that laser, that was practical. That they just put a few sparks in there to make it look like it was actually doing something. So it blows my mind when people say, "Oh, the visual effects in Covenant were shit," because do they know which parts were visual and which parts weren't, and which parts were actually? And
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that assessment at all. I mean, I don't agree that the visuals of Covenant were shit. I just think, like you just said, I think that some of the moments of CG aliens were shit for sure.
Well, I think that the central Neomorph scene looks fucking awful, and I actually
want to
love
bring it back
a lot
to
of that.
Aliens, though. I want to bring it back to Aliens in terms of the origin of kind of where we kind of splintered off, where really the success of Aliens and when you can get granular on that, and when you can hone in on why that film is successful and continues to be successful, is the relationship between character and tech, where it's not just okay. And I think it more has to do with well, I just don't love this. I just don't love Hicks. I love what Hicks was wearing. That's how indelible Hicks is. in everyone, and Hicks is nearly as flushed out as Ripley, and or other or other characters. But there's this symbiosis between character and the tech that they're using, the planes that they're driving, or the ships, the drop ships, the everything, and everyone wants a piece of it. And to me, that I have not seen that replicated. It wasn't replicated in Alien 3, in Alien Resurrection, in the AVP films, or Covenant, or Prometheus. No one has that relationship. No one's like, oh, let's go, I want this thing that... I will say, arguably, though, in Covenant, across the board, everyone I know, or a lot of people in fandom, even if they don't really like Prometheus or Covenant, they want their hands on that neomorph, or not the neomorph, the what's the other one that we see that's on the drop ship in Covenant, or that ship that they send? I can't remember the name of it. Is that the neomorph?
The protomorph?
No.
Protomorph.
Yeah, protomorph.
Okay. A lot of people love that design. I thought it looked great. It looked scary. It was one of the scariest iterations of the creature that I've ever seen. But it wasn't really a relationship so much with the tech of the film. It was more of a connection with, yes, that's scary, that's awesome. I'd like a version of that on my shelf.
Well, but also it does what we're talking about, which is it took tropes we're familiar with from the classic xenomorph design, and it did more interesting and more grotesque things with them. If you look at the NECA figure and you look at it in 360 degrees, and you're like, wow, like this is fucking. Yeah. It is so fascinating, the design choices that they made, and it's something familiar but something more extreme.
Yeah. Well, I know that we could probably talk for a long time, and we're probably going to have to do another episode of this, or another entry in this series. There's a lot more to discuss. We have other roundtables that are going to be featured in this 40 Miles of Bad Road, but I think that we probably should wrap it for now. What say you, Patrick?
I say that's a great stopping point, and I think it's a testament to a great roundtable when I could clearly be talking for another 5 hours with you guys about this, because I think it's been fucking fascinating. So I definitely want to flag this for a follow-up.
What I would like to do is offer this up to certainly all of us who are here, and all of the people who are listening to this, and we can make a post, maybe Sean or Connor or Mike, whoever wants to make a post, and kind of ask people questions. So then the part 2 of this, because I think we do need a part 2 to kind of dig in as to the relationship that people have with aliens, and that juxtaposed with the relationship we have with these other films, and talk about that feedback and read it, and investigate this a little further in a part 2.
Totally.
If you guys are willing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For more on this and our other projects, please visit www.perfectorganism.com. If you'd like to join the conversation, find us on our closed Facebook group, Building Better Worlds. To support the show, please consider visiting www.perfectorganism.com/support. We've got some great perks available. And as always, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing this show. We can't tell you how much your support means to us, but we can hopefully show you by continuing to provide better, more ambitious, and more dynamic content for years to come.